Hi, everyone. Welcome to our discussion on Ukraine with General Phil Breedlove. Quick housekeeping note, we're going to get to as many questions from you all as we can today. So if you have a question, please submit it via your Q&A button on your toolbar, and we'll do our best to get to those. I am Jim Hake, the founder and CEO at Spirit of America, and I'm very happy to see so many of our supporters on the call today, including members of our board and friends that I've had for 45 years, and you know who you are. But thank you all for letting us speak with you today and for your support for Spirit of America and what we're doing. For those of you who do not know us, Spirit of America is a privately funded nonprofit, and we have been active in helping Ukraine defend its freedom for 10 years, since the original Russian invasion in 2014. Since the full-scale invasion in 2022, our focus has been providing non-lethal assistance to help Ukraine's soldiers, to help Ukraine's military. And our goal has been to save lives and stop the suffering at its source by helping Ukraine stop Russia. We've raised over $60 million to provide a wide range of non-lethal assistance to Ukraine's military. All of that is based on needs identified by and in coordination with U.S. military personnel. And so what we're doing is filling the gaps between what's needed by Ukraine and what government is doing or what government can do. And our millions of dollars of support has had billions of dollars of documented impact. It's had a true asymmetric impact, and that's not including the thousands of lives that support has been saved. So for all of you who helped us with that, thank you so much. It's made an extraordinary difference in Ukraine. So for the rest, for everyone, if you're looking for a way to stop Russia, help Ukraine defend its freedom, defend its people, defend its democracy, a way that is compliant, legal, and has a huge impact, you're in the right place with us today. Our team is also active in the Middle East and Taiwan, and the Wall Street Journal calls Spirit of America a coalition of the can-do. So with that, it's my pleasure to introduce General Philip Breedlove. General Breedlove is a retired commander, Supreme Allied Command in Europe, the SAC-EUR. He was also, at the same time, the commander of the U.S. European Command, EUCOM as it's known, and responsible for all U.S. military operations and personnel in Europe. He is also a member of our coalition of the can-do, serving on Spirit of America's Board of Advisors. So, General Breedlove, thank you for that, and thank you for being with us today.
Great to be here.
If you could give us your take on your assessment of the current battlefield situation in Ukraine, for starters, please.
So right now we are sort of coming through the crest of Russia's reattempt to take a pretty large portion of the border trace in the north in Ukraine, as we've seen this launch on the north side of Ukraine in the Kharkiv area. I would tell you that we think the toughest part of that attack go now. We see that the attack is still carrying on, but it is not nearly pressing the Ukrainians as hard as it was several weeks ago. Partially, this is because of the delay in weapons arrivals, which we may talk about here in a few minutes. Some Russia watchers are beginning to talk a little bit about a sense of urgency by Russia. They are trying very hard to make some sort of an impact to diminish the upcoming Washington summit in NATO. And what is happening is many see that attack as beginning to culminate. And it may yet falter some before the Washington summit. So tough times for the Ukrainians. The faster that the equipment and supplies we send to them in this latest tranche gets to the battlefield, the better off they'll be. But I believe they have come through the toughest part of this attack already.
General, could you explain a little bit further how Russia may be trying to influence the NATO summit in D.C., what their aims are there?
Well, first of all, Russia, and specifically Mr. Putin's aims as it relates to NATO is always the same. That is to divide NATO, to diminish it, because it is an organization that runs by consensus, meaning 100% support of issues. And so Mr. Putin fights hard to get a crack in NATO to break it apart. And Mr. Putin is fighting really hard to break NATO support and US support away from Ukraine so that they can subjugate Ukraine as they have in the past. And so the impact of holding at bay Russia's aims in Ukraine, I don't think is well understood in America.
Well, tell us more about that. What do you think the impact of keeping Russia at bay is in Ukraine?
Well, I think very few Americans actually understand how important Ukraine is to Europe and the world. A lot of people saw that when Russia embargoed the grain and the grain stopped flowing, how quickly prices went up and how quickly portions of the world, especially in the Middle East, Northern Africa, and other places who are completely dependent on Ukrainian grain. Very few really understand what Ukraine contributes to this world. A highly technical, highly skilled workforce nation. People sadly think about Ukraine as a bunch of, drunk Cossacks out there. They are anything but that. Very well educated, very capable people. They build some of the best airplane engines in the world. Russia, China, both wanting to get at the capabilities of companies like Motor Sich, who build way better engines than the Russians or the Chinese do, and they want to understand that technology and gain that brain power that is in Ukraine. Very few people understand how many American space shots flew and continue to occasionally fly on previously purchased Ukrainian space motors. This is a very capable nation that is a big part of the European economy and ergo a big part of Western economy. And in the end, it is struggling against a world superpower to become a democracy rather than what it was when Russia was pulling all the strings in Ukraine.
On the bigger picture with what's at stake in Ukraine, I was at an event yesterday, was really focused on China, and one of the folks that was speaking there said, it was a false idea that issues like Taiwan and China, for example, were linked with Ukraine. He referred to it as this kind of three bank shot thing to line them up. And what do you see as the broader implications of what's at stake in Ukraine?
So I often get this question when I'm out, and I tell people, I served 3 times in Asia, and I've been the Asia policy guy on the Joint Staff, and so I also have Asia in my blood. And they ask me, well, what is our policy on Taiwan, or for that matter, Iran or North Korea? And I said, well, if a simple Google search, and you can go out and see what we say. I mean, most people can sort of recite the one country, 2 systems, all of the things that we say out there about these places. But then I remind them. I ask, especially English speaking Americans, what did your mother used to say to you about what you said? My mother told me over and over, people don't care what you say. They watch what you do. So we have a China-Taiwan policy. It's well written, and you can Google it easily. We actually have a lot of words out there about our approach to North Korea. They are, again, easy to search and find. And we have said over and over publicly kind of how we approach Russia. Or Iran and Russia. But the fact of the matter is, people are watching what's happening in Ukraine. Our China-Taiwan policy is being written today in Ukraine. Our North Korea policy is being written today in Ukraine. Our Iran policy is being written today in Ukraine. People are watching what we do, not what we say. And sadly, there's a pretty big discrepancy between the two.
Yeah, it's hard to see how America's credibility can recover if we can't make things work in Ukraine with the alignment of NATO, certainly
And
more
Jim, I
than
don't want to belabor, but very few Americans have ever read or even heard of the Budapest Memorandum of 1994, where we were one of 4 nations that were a part of agreeing to protect Ukraine's sovereignty and their sovereign borders if Ukraine would give up its nuclear weapons and demilitarize certain elements of their military. We, the United States, the United Kingdom, Russia, and Ukraine agreed that if Ukraine would disarm in these areas, that we would guarantee or assure their borders and their sovereignty. And we have failed miserably at our promises in the Budapest Memorandum.
yeah, it's a great point. Going back to the current situation in Ukraine on the battlefield, how quickly is the U.S. military assistance getting to Ukraine, and is it making a difference?
So we have a system that kind of works pretty good. Most of it going through Poland and Poland's border, some of it going through Romania and Romania's border. And we had a system that I wouldn't call well-oiled, but it was working pretty well. Right up until the American policy stopped supplying weapons for almost 6 months, we really put Ukraine behind the 8 ball. And so systems and things began to shut down, and methods of transfer and how it got across the border and all these things went very, very shallow because we were not sending very much to Ukraine. And so not only did we have to restart the supply of weapons, but you had to sort of rebuild and recover the transferal capabilities on those borders. And so it has been a very slow and very, very costly restart. And when I say costly, that means Ukrainian soldiers' lives, Ukrainian civilians and civilian children's lives, and the land of Ukraine paid the price for that slowdown.
And what are your thoughts on the long-range weapons and the limitations, such as they are on on Ukraine's use of those weapons?
So, as a commander, and I would sort of remind that Secretary Austin once was Lloyd Austin to me because we were peers. He was the commander in CENTCOM when I was the commander in EUCOM on the U.S. side. And a commander like that, a theater level commander that is told that he cannot shoot at the enemy outside of the battle area, and yet that enemy is being allowed to shoot at him from nearly 360 degrees around the compass, from Belarus in the north all the way around to the northwest part of the Black Sea in the south. Russia is shooting into Ukraine every day by the dozens and occasionally hundreds into Ukraine, shooting, using not only Russian equipment, but Iranian equipment, North Korean equipment. I mean, they're using anything they can get in the world, and they're shooting constantly. I'm doing this with my hand to be annoying, to make a point. And yet we have forbid Ukraine from returning fire into Russia. Now, in the last week or so, we've seen some tweaks to that policy. For a little while, we were allowing Ukraine to fire back into a very narrow area on the north and northwest side of Kharkiv, where the attacks were coming from. And many were just overjoyed that that would change. And we were happy that it changed, but it is just a tiny little fledgling first step towards where we need to be. And again, in the last 2 days, after much complaints, there's some new words out there about they can fire back at places where they're being fired at from or something. The fact of the matter is, in a broad swath around the border, Russia uses all that land as a sanctuary because they've been assured by the American administration that Ukraine's not going to fire it in there at them. They set up their staging, they mount their attacks, they organize, they attack, and all of those areas, to an American commander or a NATO commander, this is where you defeat the enemy before the enemy comes to defeat you. And yet we've had this horribly restricting policy, which has created a sanctuary that is made Russia very hard to beat because they're protected by our policy.
Well, you're a great student of history, and is there any example in history where an enemy has been given sanctuary where it has actually worked for the defender, in this case, Ukraine?
No, I can't think of one. You know, the Fatah in Afghanistan killed us for years. There were portions of North Vietnam that were off limits that killed us. We have at our own peril throughout history given the enemy sanctuary, and we eventually figure it out that this is no way to fight a war. And I would assure you that when not Secretary Austin, but when Lloyd Austin was the commander of CENTCOM, if someone built a sanctuary in his fight box, he would not have been happy.
So we have a few questions from the participants here today. The first one is about, well, very much related to your background as an F-16 pilot. Where will the recent additions of F-16s most benefit Ukraine? Let's just start with that one.
So I just would love to caution here that we have a fledgling operation. It's going to be way too small in the beginning. The F-16, I flew it for 24 years off and on. I love the airplane. I flew every block from 5 to block 52. It is a great capability, but the way it's being brought into Ukraine at this trickle-in rate and this trickle-in training rate, very little F-16 power is going to build for some time. It may be over a year before we truly get to a level of pilots and airframes that are ready to make an impact. It will eventually make an impact. It is the beginning of the Air Force that will protect Ukraine in the future. It's going to be quite some time before it has an impact on this battlefield. I was just asked yesterday when I was in a VTC with a foreign nation, a brand new NATO nation kind of VTC. And a gentleman asked me, so how long is it going to take to get this 10 years of experience that you talk about in your American fighter pilots? And I said, it's going to take 10 years to get 10 years of experience. Yes, they begin as experienced fighter pilots in MiGs, flying to Soviet doctrine and Soviet tactics. And we need to build an Air Force in Western kit that uses Western kit in ways that makes it superior to Eastern kit.
Another question. By the way, if you all do have questions, use the Q&A button on your Zoom toolbar, please. Here's another. General, does Russia have a soft spot that could be exploited to force a retreat or favorable settlement?
Well, what we have learned over time with Russia is they do not understand how to properly supply a battlefield in a fight. I mean, they are pumping massive quantities of ammunition forward to fire at Ukraine. But we hear that the medical conditions, the feeding and housing conditions, the morale sustaining conditions of the Russian Air Force is not what we would expect to sustain a fight. So once again, we need to readjust our battlefield approach such that we allow Ukraine to destroy those depots where all of this supply is that are sitting just over the borders in sanctuary, if we can build a new policy that allows Ukraine to fire into Russia like Russia is firing into Ukraine, then Ukraine can begin to attack their weaknesses, which are truly logistics and supply.
And this may be a part of that may be a part of the answer to the next question, but General, what do you say to those who say Ukraine can't win?
I think Ukraine absolutely can win. Remember in the first part of the war, when Ukraine was supplied in a way that was commensurate with the Russian supply, Russia made this big dash into Ukraine, and then Ukraine backed them out. Remember the maps 7, 8, 9 days into this war, and look at them now. Russia was strategically defeated on the northwest side of Kyiv. Russia was strategically defeated on the north and northeast side of Kharkiv, and those forces had to retreat back into Belarus and east into Russia to refit and refurb to rejoin the fight. In that sanctuary, they were allowed to refit and refurb, where we should have been pounding them during that time. And so when a well-provisioned Ukrainian force meets a Russian force, the Ukrainian force wins. And so this, I believe, is demonstrative about how this war ends. This war is going to end exactly as Western policy makers decide it's going to win. If we give Ukraine what it needs to win, it will win. But when we do that, we have to be academically honest and recognize that we may face those things that we told Russia we were afraid of: a widening war and tactical nuclear weapons. We rushed to tell Russia 10 years ago, when this whole thing started, what we were afraid of. We didn't want to see an expansion of the battlefield, and we would at all costs avoid tactical nuclear issues. So what does Russia play back to us every week? What we told them we were afraid of. And so if we make a decision to supply Ukraine with what they need, then we have to face up to the academic conclusion that we may see some of what we fear.
And here's a question exactly on that point, General. If Russia is losing or begins to lose in Ukraine, do you think Putin will actually follow through on the use of nuclear weapons?
Two answers to this. The first answer is the person asking the question, I have no beef with you. I love and respect you. But this is exactly what Mr. Putin wants all Westerners thinking about. This is the most important weapon that he has in this war. His war of words and his war of intimidation are succeeding wildly because in the West, we are deterred. You know, in the past, we had a leader from the left, John F. Kennedy, who was not deterred and faced up to a similar problem. We had a leader from the right, Ronnie Reagan, who faced a similar problem with the intermediate range missile crisis, and he was not deterred, and we came to a better conclusion. But today we face again an enemy that first and foremost is winning current battles because we are limiting ourselves because our fears that he plays to in his war of words and intimidation. So that is the first answer. The second answer is I would have said myself 2 or 3 years ago that Mr. Putin might pop off a tactical nuclear weapon. I think today that's highly unlikely. I believe if you've read what's happened between China and Russia on these subjects, China has told them they don't want them in this business. China shares the longest border of Russia of anybody. They don't want tactical nukes getting popped off around their countryside. And I think China is, who is really the big daddy to Russia these days, has told them they don't want that. And also, I believe, starting with Prigozhin, we have seen a very public beginning of an erosion of support and control for Mr. Putin. And I'm not sure that he would be totally confident in doing something as drastic as popping off a nuke.
Well, another question from one of the participants here related to that. How long can Russia, given its economic and demographic limitations, keep up its current operational tempo?
Well, I think that Russia can go for some time. I mean, the bottom line is they have a depth of people that Ukraine does not have. And, you know, we've already seen the best of their kit as far as rolling stock armor has been decimated on the battlefield, but they have a depth of these older model tanks that they can bring to the fight. And if you look at the way they're fighting in this sort of World War I style, attritional based fight that Russia has installed in the north and northeast and east, they can throw a lot of that very less capable armor and very almost untrained troops yet into this fight. So I do not think that they're going to run out anytime soon. I think that the quality of what they're putting on the battlefield is seriously diminished since the first days of this fight.
And another audience question, do you think Ukraine has a chance to become a NATO member at some point?
I certainly hope so. I'm not going to stick my neck out there and say yes or no, because this is going to be purely political and purely policy. Again, the White House spokesman the other day sort of shifted the battlefield for goalposts, or however you want to say it, for Ukraine. He said that for Ukraine to join NATO, a couple of things have to happen. And one of them is that they have to build a more robust defense industry. If we had applied that goalpost to 8 out of the last 10 entries into NATO, they wouldn't have gotten in. I don't know why we're all of a sudden creating new problems to slow down the incoming of Ukraine. Here's what I do know, and I saw this play out when I sat in meetings on what we used to call the open door policy. And that is, as long as there's an open battle going on inside of Ukraine, the NATO nations are not going to bring them aboard. That has been straight up the way they've called it for many years. And during my time, from 13 to 16, that was a part of almost every conversation about, will we expand NATO?
And we have just a little bit of time left. So I'd like to ask you a question related to Spirit of America's work. We have a number of our supporters on the call here, and you're familiar with what we're doing to help Ukraine win, of course. What's your advice to us moving forward in terms of what we ought to be thinking about doing, what we should do?
Well, like today, I think getting the word out. There are a lot of Americans who want to help, but there's also a lot of Americans who have seen their buddies, you know, kind of get hoodwinked into giving to organizations where lots of money goes somewhere we don't know about. I think that one of the shining important parts of Spirit of America is you guys work literally on a shoestring, and your impact is really quite measurable and demonstrative. Your introduction was fabulous, but I mean, people really don't understand, from the small things that you do as far as supply chains and things and supplying things, up to pretty pretty amazing things that you bring to the tactical battlefield that actually help the warfighter right there on the battlefield. Spirit of America has a breadth of applications that they use to bring real, demonstrative, measurable impact to the battlefield. And they have a much shorter supply chain and entry chain than a lot of other organizations out there. I would just offer to people, this is an organization that you can trust to spend your money wisely. And you can trust that the money you spend is going to be impacting on the battlefield relatively quickly. I wish I could talk about a couple of things. I'm just not, because I don't want to give it away to the guys that we're working against. But the fact of the matter is, this organization does real work to change the dynamic on the battlefield.
Well, General, thank you for that, and thank you for being with us today. We have a number of other questions that I wish we had time to get to. For those of you who asked them, we'll do our best to get back to you. There are a lot of really good ones there. And thank you all for joining us today. Again, General, thank you for being with us and being such an awesome member of our coalition of the Can Do. For everyone else, if you're interested in saving lives and help Ukraine defend its people and its freedom, please join with us at Spirit of America. Thank you.